Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 11th, 2024 City Council meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask the clerk to please do a roll call.
Councilmember Wilkinson.
Present.
Councilmember Cooper.
Present.
Mayor Mark.
Here.
Councilmember Lynch.
Here.
For the record, Councilmember Chemnitzer is absent.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 3, reports and presentations. We'll begin with City Council reports. Do we have any reports by City Council members?
I have a brief update on the RBRA, if I may. This is about the Richardson Bay Regional Agency. I currently serve as the board chair. Just a couple of quick updates. Very recently, the last floating home on Richardson Bay was brought to shore, which was a major milestone in the effort to move boats off the water as required by state authorities. It's an important benchmark for the RBRA's agreement with the BCDC, the Bay Conservation Development Commission, to protect the environment and to make the Richardson Bay safe and accessible for everyone. Also in recent news, and this may be well known to everyone, I just wanted to share it in case anyone missed it. There's $3 million of state funds which were allocated to the RBRA to help establish a housing program to help folks who previously lived on the water to move into safe and secure housing. And in addition, there's money in the RBRA's budget for its so-called vessel buyback program, which allows participants to sell their boat at a fixed metric by foot to the RBRA and get that boat off the water. A lot of these boats, many of them are not safe or seaworthy, and many are classified as marine debris. And that's a big part of the advancements that the RBRA has made. And the last update is recently there was a ruling from federal court in a litigation. The court decision came out in December. The claim was by a resident or a boater living on the water that they had a constitutional right to live on the water, and that the RBRA's enforcement mechanism was depriving them of that constitutional right. And the court found that the boater had not stated or identified any constitutional right to live on the water, and that the RBRA's permit scheme mechanism did not infringe on those rights. So that was a nice and important endorsement and affirmation of the RBRA's approach to maintaining the waterways. And that's the update I have.
Thank you very much. Please.
I just have a quick update on Marine Clean Energy, and I sit on that board, including the executive committee. And we had our first discussion this week about the budget for next year, and we are, for the first time in this extraordinarily good position, that we will have met our reserve goals at Marine Clean Energy, and they were very high reserve goals. And so the discussion that the agency will now be having is to whether to put aside excess reserves to invest in assets or start to reduce rates. And so I'm curious to get any feedback that the council might have, or the community members might have, about their preferences in relation to those choices, because obviously electricity rates are extremely high at the moment for many people, and they're struggling with that. So it would be good to know if there is any feedback. Thank you.
Can I ask a question quickly about that? Does MCE as a provider for PG&E, are those rates a straight pass through, or does the Pacific Gas and Electric have some or more say in all of that?
So there's different components to your electricity bill, and so there is the piece that MCE is in competition with PG&E is the generation rate, and then there's transmission, which is still completely controlled by PG&E, and so it's only on the generation that there's competition. And MCE's typical approach has been to be price competitive with PG&E and go a little bit lower if they can, but they're now, as I say, in this good position where they could potentially do more than that if they wanted to. But the other alternative would be that they actually start to purchase generation assets themselves, which they have never done, which obviously requires debt financing and some of these reserves to be used. And so there's pros and cons of each. It's just, I've certainly heard from community members that rates are extraordinarily high, and there may be some room there to lower those.
Thank you.
I just wanted to announce that our wildlife consultant, Rebecca Dimitrick, will be in Belvedere this coming Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. She has about 8 or 9 appointments set up, but she may have more time if anyone is still interested in contacting her about house prevention or other information and education that she could help with. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. Moving on to, I'm sorry, I'll pause right there. Do we have any public comment on the city council reports? Seeing none in the room. Madam Clerk, anybody online?
I see none.
Thank you so much. Next item is a city manager report.
Thank you, Mayor Mark, and good evening, council, and welcome to those attending in person and remotely tonight. I do have a few announcements and reminders. I'll start off by inviting the public to attend the Planning Commission meeting on March 19th, which will begin at 5:30 p.m. The agenda includes a few, excuse me, public hearing topics, but probably the most relevant to the community will be a discussion about Mallard Point. During this meeting, the Plan Commission will evaluate the project applications, the revised plans, and provide comments related to design review, demolition, and the tentative map and the revocable license for the project. We are anticipating that the project documents and revised set of plans will be available to the public on Wednesday, March 13th of this week. Shifting gears, it's March, which means that it's the time of year when staff embarks on their annual budgeting process. Every 12 months, we evaluate the city's current and future needs. This week, Helga and I are reviewing each department's requested budgets and goals for the upcoming year, along with recognizing other long-term needs for the 5-year plan. Our schedule has a preliminary budget coming to the Finance Committee at the end of April. From there, the City Council will review a draft proposal at its May 13th meeting, and will consider a final draft at a public hearing during council on June 10th. As we talk about the budget, I want to again remind those interested about our council retreat. This event will be held on Wednesday, March 27th. We will be meeting at the Tiburon Library in the new Founders Room. This is a nice location with a bit more room than our typical meeting place at the China Cabin. We will discuss a variety of topics related to finances, the city policies, and priorities for the upcoming fiscal year. This meeting will be held open to the public, so please feel free to come by. We'll start the meeting at 9 a.m. sharp. And always, I'd like to give a shout out for projects that the Public Works Department is undertaking. In the next 2 weeks, sections of the decomposed granite pathway on San Rafael Avenue are being dug out and replaced with fresh material. If you've walked on that path during or after the rain, then you know it's often a game of hopscotch to avoid the puddles. Repair that pathway is a capital project that was identified for this current fiscal year. So I want to give a thank you to Tony and his team for getting that underway. And then finally, the public safety is always a chief concern within the city. A good response plan relies heavily on our ability to communicate critical information during an emergency. One of the primary ways that the city and county do this is through Alert Marin. So to ensure that the system is functioning as expected, the county will run its test of their Alert Marin system on Saturday, the 23rd. Tests will start at 10 a.m., so make sure you're signed up for Alert Marin. It only takes about 10 minutes. More information about this test will be provided in this Friday's newsletter. You can also visit the City of Belvedere website, where we've posted an information flyer with helpful links. That's all I have. Happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for our city manager? I have one quick question. The March 27th city retreats at the Founders Room in the library. Do you know if that library has broadcast capability for an online?
It does, and they have a Zoom meeting owl if we'd like to broadcast that.
Why don't we talk about that separately? But I would imagine it's our we have made a commitment to be as transparent as possible. It would seem to be at the appropriate venue for a web broadcast.
Yeah, happy to chat about that with you.
Okay, thank you. Please, please.
I also was just remembering that we had run a survey on the website, and I wondered if those results are planned to be talked about at the retreat, or?
Yeah, so we ran the survey, I think it was about 2 months, January through February of this year. Variety of topics were brought up as priorities for the community. I think the mayor and I, we discussed those, and we have a short list of items that rose to the top. that were common interest items within the residents. So the goal is to discuss some of those and talk about solutions at the meeting.
And at the very least, you're absolutely right. I- If we won't address them all as an agenda items, we'll address that they were brought up in that survey and.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any public comment on the city manager report? Seeing nobody here, Madam Clerk?
We have Mr. Rothman.
Thank you. Hi, Bill.
Hi. Thank you very much. Will the retreat be a Zoom meeting with a hybrid meeting with the public able to participate as well, just like the city council?
Our hope is that we will be able to do that, Bill. We just mentioned that, and we know that the Founders Room does have the facility to do so. We'll test it and make sure that that's to see if that's a possibility, but that's our intention.
And could it be that you would, when you come with the breeze, that you could say whether it would be, because there might be people who would like to participate, and if they could know in advance, that would be good.
I
Thank
think we'll know. I think we'll know by then. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
There are no other hands raised.
Thank you so much. We'd now like to move on to the swearing in of our new police officer, Officer Devine. Divine, I'm sorry. I said it wrong. even
Thank
now.
you and good evening, Mayor Mark, council members. Tonight, I am pleased to introduce our newest police officer, including the swearing in. I'll give you a little brief bio of our newest officer. Officer Joe Devine was born and raised in a small town in Iowa. He obtained a degree in education and environmental sciences from Prescott College, and he taught high school of science for 7 years. After relocating to California in 2013, Joe and his wife started running the emergency foster care shelter for Marin County. Along with being a foster parent, Joe also worked for Children and Family Services, supporting families involved with the child welfare system. It was during that time that Joe found his passion for law enforcement. He attended Santa Rosa Junior College Police Academy and graduated in May of 2023. He came to Belvedere after gaining post-academy experience with Mill Valley Police Department. Joe is married to his wife, Anna, who's a labor and delivery nurse at Marin Health. They live in Marin County with their daughter, Naeli, son, Leo, and their dog, Gigi. In his free time, Joe enjoys spending time boating, sea kayaking, fishing, and being outdoors with his family. With that said, Officer Devine, can you please come up for the swearing in?
Congratulations, officer. We look forward to seeing you on our streets and everywhere around. Can I ask if there's any public comment on that nice ceremony? Seeing none? Seeing none online, we'll move on to item 3D, which I believe we're going to continue, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, we wish Mr. Binkley better health, and we'll continue to the next opportunity. Item 4 is the consent calendar. The consent calendar will be considered as a whole. Can I ask if there are any comments by city council members to question or remove any items on the consent calendar? Seeing none, are there any public comments to question or remove any items on the consent calendar?
I see no hands raised.
Could I then ask for a motion to approve item 4A and 4B?
So moved.
Second.
Second, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Moving on to the public hearing, item 5A, appeal of construction time limit assessed to the construction project for 22 to 26 Beach Road. We have a staff report, please. Are they not here yet? Do you want to,
Correct, Mayor. The appellant is not here at this time.
should we move on to item 5B and just reschedule on the fly?
Yeah, just to clarify for the council, there is no requirement that the appellant needs to be here, but certainly we can put this to later in the meeting and see if they do show up perhaps a little bit late, or we can reschedule for a different time. I did confirm with the city clerk that they were notified, I think twice, when the agenda was sent out and also earlier today.
Was it your understanding that they were going to attend?
Yes, sir.
Okay, if we have the understanding that they're going to attend, I think it's reasonable to go on to item 5B and then check in again. Make sense?
Certainly reasonable, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll pause on item 5A and move on to 5B, discussion and possible action regarding Belvedere's utilization. I'm sorry, regarding the 250 Beach Road historic designation.
Thank you for your patience, Mayor Mark and council members. For your consideration this evening is an application for historic designation for the property located at 250 Beach Road. On July 11th, 2023, the Historic Preservation Committee recommended designating 250 Beach Road as a City of Belvedere historically designated property. And on February 20th, 2024, the Planning Commission recommended City Council designate the residence at 250 Beach Road as a City of Belvedere historic property. Pursuant to Title 21 of the Belvedere Municipal Code, a structure must satisfy at least 3 of the 9 criteria outlined in the Landmarks Preservation Ordinance to receive historic designation. When surveyed by members of the Historic Preservation Subcommittee on June 11, 2023, 250 Beach Road satisfied 5 of the 9 criteria in categories related to architecture, design, history, and environment. Staff recommends that City Council adopt the resolution approving the designation as a City of Belvedere historic property. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions for staff? Please.
So I have a question in relation to the applicant. Is the applicant here tonight or not?
We reached out, I did not get a response, so no.
So I guess my question is, does the applicant understand that even if we grant historic designation, depending on the other agenda item this evening, that they may not be eligible for Mills Act tax benefits?
Yes, I made the applicant, I let them know that that was a possibility.
And they still wish to proceed with the constraints that will be on them as a historic property?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions for staff?
Just a quick one, Sammy, and this is really just out of curiosity. In the staff memo under criteria 1 architecture, there's a quote about the style being more of a reimagining, and it goes on from there, close quote, but it's not credited to anyone. Do you know where that quote came from?
I do not, but I can find out from the subcommittee members who wrote the report where that might have come from.
No, I want to congratulate whoever came up with cartoonish pastiche. That's going in my repertoire. So anyway, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sammy. So I will now open the public hearing and ask if there's any comment. I don't believe the appellant, sorry, the applicant is going to make a presentation. So any public comment? Seeing none. Likewise, I don't see anyone online.
Mayor Mark, I see no hands raised.
Thank you. In that case, I'll bring it back to the City Council for deliberation. Vice Mayor Cooper, would you like to begin?
I actually sit on the Historic Preservation Committee, and I was attending when this house was brought up, and it really does have a fascinating history in the movies and all kinds of wonderful things. And I think the other thing about it is that it's the 3rd of the 3 Jack Heidelberg homes to become a historic residence. And I think that these 3 homes really are unique. Anyone who walks around the island always talks about them as the gingerbread homes or Hansel and Gretel homes, and they're just wonderful, and I'm thrilled that they'll remain the way they look as long as everybody's around. We certainly appreciate everything Historic Preservation Committee does in keeping our community, the older homes, so that we can appreciate them. So I would support this.
Wonderful. Thank you. Councilmember Wilkinson.
I have nothing to add. I support, I echo everything that Jane has said.
Thank you. Councilmember Lynch.
Thank you. Yeah, I support it too. I think the staff memo was very well done, and I'm grateful to the Historic Preservation Committee and the Planning Commission to get this house and this project to this point. You know, we're going to be talking later about the Mills Act, and I think it's important to distinguish historic preservation and a historic distinction from a Mills Act designation with the tax benefits that relate to that, because the historic preservation is actually the first step and the most important step, I think, mostly in preserving. They don't inherently go together. Those houses, the Heidelberg houses, are so distinctive. And when I got on planning commission, somebody said to me, you guys should do something to preserve those houses, because somebody could come in without a historic preservation and make an application to raise those houses. They are so unique, and I think it's actually a really important step. And I'm glad that the property owner has made this application. And I can make the findings for criteria 1, 2, 5, 6, and 7. So I would support it.
Wonderful. Thank you. I will echo those comments. I thank the Historic Preservation Committee and the Planning Commission for all their work. I read the reports and it was both entertaining and enlightening. And I can likewise make all the findings to establish the historic designation for this property. Could I please have a motion?
Motion that the city council designates the property located at 250 Beach Road as a City of Belvedere historic property. Resolution number 2024-10.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Wonderful. Just remembering if I'm asked for the public comment, which I did. Can we bounce back to 5A? Brian?
We still have no response from the appellant.
I mean, the agenda was published. I don't know that we should move on. I don't know that we should continue to delay it. Would you recommend? I would think we should hear it and then.
This is up to the discretion of the city council. They've been provided with sufficient opportunity to appear. I think on multiple occasions, the planning director just reached out, just for the purpose of the record, just reached out via phone and via text and received no response either.
Okay, do we have an issue relating to the public hearings and other schedule items? Meaning one before the other, or could we keep delaying it?
We could continue with the rest of the items and again, check to see whether they appear or not.
Why don't we do that? I don't think there's any harm in keeping the agenda going until we hear from them, or if we run out of things to do, we'll address that item.
All right, certainly that sounds fine. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. So I'll call item 6A, discussion of and possible action regarding modification to the City of Belvedere's Mills Act program.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Mark and council members. The item before you tonight includes a discussion and possible action regarding the City of Belvedere's Mills Act. Staff is looking for direction on whether to modify the Mills Act program or to discontinue the program. The Mills Act is a California state law that allows cities to enter into contracts with the owners of historic structures. Under these contracts, private property owners receive an economic incentive through a property tax reduction to restore, preserve, and maintain their historic properties. At its regularly scheduled meeting in July, the City Council received a report from staff about the city's Mills Act program. To summarize, due to staffing challenges, Belvedere's current approach does not require property owners to provide active plans or proof of satisfactory restoration, nor does the city have a fully developed inspection or monitoring program. As a result, the city cannot guarantee that money saved on property taxes goes toward a property's rehabilitation. After deliberation on the issue, the council requested that staff return at a later date with potential modifications to standards and policies related to future Mills Act agreements, as well as an analysis of the merits of discontinuing the program. As part of the staff's work in assessing how to improve Belvedere's program, state law and the characteristics of other Mills Act programs throughout the state were examined and determined that there are approximately 90 municipalities in California with Mills Act programs, with a great deal of variation in program specifics. Some key elements that exist in most other programs that the city has not been able to incorporate include defined scopes of work, value of rehabilitation versus tax savings, inspections, and administrative fees. Should the council wish to modify the program, a few of the key modifications would include strengthen guidance to the Historic Preservation Committee, Planning Commission, and Council on assessing the eligibility of properties for historic designation, a robust monitoring program, administrative policy manual revisions, and a few others that are mentioned in the staff report. Staff estimates that developing these more robust program elements will take approximately 6 months or longer, which would be returned to the council for future review. Should the council wish to discontinue the program, it is important to remember that the Mills Act program seeks to encourage owners of qualified historic properties to actively rehabilitate, restore, and maintain their properties in return for property tax relief to help defray some of the costs of these improvements. At present, the city does not require active plans or proof of satisfactory work to qualify for a Mills Act agreement, nor does it have an active inspection or monitoring program through the course of the agreement. This results in the city's potential loss of tax revenue without necessarily receiving the public benefit of rehabilitation and maintenance of structures. It is important to note that discontinuation of the Mills Act to new applicants does not prohibit property owners from continuing to seek historic designation. The Historic Preservation Committee will continue to do important work as well as review planning applications for work at properties with historic designation. Additionally, the historic designation of properties would continue. It should also be mentioned that Belvedere is not alone in struggling with administering its Mills Act program appropriately. In Los Angeles, the largest in the state, is under review and has not accepted any new contracts since 2020. Its concerns focus on program sustainability, with few inspections completed, and program equity, with savings disproportionately benefiting wealthier property owners. We here are a small staff. We have not been monitoring and managing the Mills Act in ways which we need to. If the program is discontinued and notices of non-renewal are issued to all existing participants, the program's costs will gradually fall to zero over the next decade. The program currently costs $375,000 in foregone annual property tax, of which $78,000 is a direct loss to the city of Belvedere. These savings could be reassigned to other city priorities after existing Mills Act agreements begin to expire. Tonight, we're asking for direction on whether to modify the Mills Act program and return to City Council at a later date with proposed modifications, or to return to the April City Council meeting with an ordinance discontinuing the city's Mills Act program. And I'm available for questions should you have any.
Thank you so much. Do we have questions for Rebecca relating to this item from City Council? Please.
I was curious, did you hear from any current Mills Act contracted recipients about this?
No, I have not.
Okay. And then I have a question that was asked earlier to me in an email. And what I want to know is, or what we want to know, are all 29 properties that are listed in Belvedere Historic Designation under the Chapter 2021 in our municipal code, are they all subject to the improvement limitations that exist under 2104-010, which essentially says a designated structure, the interior can be permitted without approval from the Historic Preservation Committee and the Planning Commission, but I think it's saying that anything else is restricted as far as changing the exterior of the home. So would everything that exists right now stay the same as it has been for historic homes? None of that was dependent on the Mills Act.
Our historic preservation ordinance would not
change.
change except for the one section that discusses Mills Act.
Okay.
If we were to discontinue it, but everything historic preservation would remain the same.
Okay, thank you. Those are the only questions I have.
Thank you. Rebecca, I'm just curious, does anybody keep an eye on Mills Act utilization and adherence to the state law. I'll compare it to FEMA looking out, for how communities follow their restrictions and guidelines.
That has not been a part of our Mills Act agreement sort of application process and subsequent building permits should a Mills Act home come to us.
Yeah, no, I'm meaning, because clearly we're not following what the Mills Act designates as the pre-planning of the work and the adherence to those plans in relation to those benefits. I'm curious, is there a Mills Act overlord that looks at this in some way?
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, if I may, Mayor, just very
Yeah.
briefly, I am aware of one California state agency that has some oversight, although
Okay.
overlord may be stating it.
I know.
It's the Office of Historic Preservation. I think it provides more sort of a clearinghouse or an informational resource rather than any enforcement entity, though.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'll now ask for any public comment on item 6A. Good evening. Just make sure the green light is on and the mic, the one on your left. There you go.
Good evening. Hello, council members and Mayor. My name is George Ganos. I'm the current chairman of the Historic Preservation Committee in Belvedere, and thank you for the nice comments that you've had about our committee. I am here as a citizen, not representing the committee, because we haven't had a chance to meet and discuss this or provide any input. I did get some heads up, and so I was happy to come here and also to read the report and provide, comments, I guess, as a citizen. I was surprised. I've been a member for many, many years on that committee to learn that we didn't live up to this requirement of having the actual funds reinvested in the property. To some extent, I think people on our own initiative probably have done some, but again, it hasn't been monitored and it's been on probably an ad hoc basis. The bad news, we haven't lived up to our the letter of the law. The good news is, as I understand it, and the comment I had was for you, Jane, that that the 29, now 30, the one that was just approved, that those are essentially, if any material changes need to be that affect the historical designation or character of that property, needs to come to the Historic Preservation Committee for approval. So the good news is, if we lived up to it, there may not have been very many people who have done this. So we now do have at least 30 of these buildings and properties, many of which are homes, that are historically designated. So that's a good thing. I think the decision, like a lot of decisions, I sat there many years ago on the council, are balancing financial and community interests. There is a lot of support and interest for preserving our history, which is unique. And so I think the hard decision is to balance that. I wonder, and this is maybe a hard thing to answer by staff, how much more administrative work there would be if you continued the Mills Act and required that people invest money, the tax savings in the property. That may be a dampening effect, so it may limit, the people that want to apply. That's a factor I think that needs to be taken into consideration. If you terminate the Mills Act, there will be still work for us to do. As mentioned, if these houses are coming forward with changes, there are just specific rules that you read some of them and here that we need to preserve that. And we will lose, I'm sure, some of houses that historically I think would work. If I have another minute or two, would that be okay? Lost my train of thought here. We would lose some of the houses. For example, people who are on Prop 13 who have very low taxes. are not incentivized to file for and designate their house. If they do it and don't get the Mills Act, compensation, which they have to reinvest, and it does affect the value of the property, going forward. And we've heard some comments from people in the community about that. So again, we will lose some valuable properties, but and again, I think there will still be work for our committee to do. And as Andy Allen, I'm sure you'll speak there himself, he's working on getting a list of additional houses that not necessarily maybe apply for Mills Act or historic, but at least flag for the staff that, when a building permit comes in application, at least they know it's a historic property in someone's perspective. And while they don't have any authority to require any historic continue to work, at least be some informational system that will help the staff. So those are my comments.
Any other public comment here in the room? Please.
Green. Thank you, City Council. I think that the Historical Committee has done excellent work. And I think there is a lacune in lists of historical properties that should be protected. And I think the staff and the Planning Commission could benefit from an updating of the historical buildings in Belvedere. My house is an example. It's not on any list. It's clearly historical. And without getting the Mills Act involved, I think Historical Committee is a very useful entity to keep and to encourage. I left a meeting with the Historical Committee back in 2022, and I was directed by the committee to find out if such a list would be helpful to the staff. In fact, Sammy, he said it was. I talked to a couple of planning commissioners, and they said it was. And this is just sort of an informational comment because the list would continue with the criteria in the code section. And that's all that I'm here to say, and that I'm going to help with James Campbell working on it. I think we can raise some money independent of any budget item to expand the list, and that's what I'm here for. So, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Seeing no other further comments, any public comment online?
Yes, we have James Campbell.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hi, James.
Good evening. My name is James Campbell, and I just sort of want to echo some of the comments here tonight. Despite whatever your decision might be about continuing the Mills Act tonight, I think myself and many would agree that the historic heritage of Belvedere is a very important part of why people are so charmed by our city. And so I think that the discrepancy between our city's historic resource list and the counties, which names quite a few more buildings than the city does, gives us a kind of a good indication of some of the work that we could perhaps create as a new mandate for the Historic Preservation Committee to look at that list of the county and do the necessary work and research to see if we should be adding those properties to the city's list, and maybe even expanding beyond the county's list, because I think that was done several years ago, and there's probably some other houses that would definitely qualify. So I just wanted to again emphasize how I think it is important to identify the historic resources in Belvedere. I think they're an important part of our community, and with or without the Mills Act, I think it's a useful tool for this city to have. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
There are no other hands raised.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So bring it back to the City Council for further comment. Councilmember Wilkinson.
Can I actually ask a question of staff first in relation to the comments made by George and Andy? The this county historic resource inventory list that's different from the city's one, do properties in the county list also have to comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards and the California Historical Building Code when they do work? Sorry.
I don't know, but I can assume that they would. Or actually, I don't know. Because we have a specific historic designation process here in the city of Belvedere. And the homes that the Historic Preservation Committee reviews, Planning Commission reviews, and City Council reviews are subject to Chapter 21 of our municipal code.
So does anyone know how those properties that are on the county list but not on our list got onto the county list? Andy?
Andy?
James, anybody?
I believe that there was a county assessment and the state had some money to look at resources, including the Landmark Society had a list. So there were several lists floating around. I had them all sorted out once upon a time.
And Andy's triggering my memory. We do have a list that the Landmarks Commission went around at, I'm guessing 20 years ago, and reviewed all the homes that were older than 50 years old. And so that county list could be part of that list. So those would not be subject to
Yeah.
Chapter 21.
Yeah, I did a little nosing around this afternoon about those two lists, and it's my understanding, just by briefly looking at them, looking them up, is that they are target lists or for your information type lists. They're not subject to any protections. They're be on the lookout that these are historically potential properties. By age or because they're on some other watch list, for lack of a better way of describing it, so that a historic preservation committee like ours would be well aware of it. So I certainly think it's worthy to try to incorporate those lists into a broader list that we're aware of and the Planning Commission is aware of and the Historical Preservation Committee is aware of. Please continue. Sorry.
Because I think there's various issues going on here, and setting aside the Mills Act question for now, I wholeheartedly support the comments that were made about the importance of encouraging and knowing which the historic homes are in Belvedere. And so I do think there could be some important work for historic preservation more generally to consolidate those lists, try and approach homeowners that might be on the county list and not the city list to put together a really comprehensive list of properties in Belvedere that with some narrative around that, because I think it's a great sort of resource for Belvedere and for visitors, for everybody else to know about all of those homes. So I think that's a really wonderful project for the Historic Preservation Committee to do. So that would be my first comment. My second comment in relation to the Mills Act is really that my understanding from Larkspur, which I think is the only other city in Marin that had a Mills Act program, that once they tightened up their program, they never had another applicant because most people were using the program inappropriately, and so it sort of sunset naturally by itself. But it still required a little bit of management. And my sense here is that given our small staff and having sort of looked into this in quite some detail, it's very hard because it's such a tiny program to allocate staff time, which is then clumsy because the staff turnover, people don't really know who's in charge of it. We're actually exceeding our dollar limit right now because people weren't tracking it correctly. It's just a little bit of a messy program and wasn't achieving its purpose as designed by state law. So I would certainly support, I think, winding down this program because it's using tax dollars. It's losing us tax dollars, and we're not getting any historical benefit other than that. Whilst people have historic preservation and are receiving Mills Act tax breaks, they really can't demolish their home because then the penalty is huge. But I think it is important to state, and I'm pretty confident of this, that even if a property has historic designation, the homeowner can still raise the property. If you read our municipal code, what it actually says is that they have to give an extra 6 months of negotiation with staff to try and discourage them from doing that. I think that's my understanding. And if someone wants to check that, I'm pretty sure that's what our code says. So I also think, misunderstanding around what historic preservation does. So the one benefit of the Mills Act is that it locks people in for the period that they're getting their tax breaks, but then they can still come in and raise it anytime they want to when they're not in receipt of those tax breaks. So I also think an important job for the Historic Preservation Committee is really to stress and encourage the homeowners the benefits to them of historic preservation, because I think there are, putting aside the tax breaks, be interesting to look at the house prices for those that have historic designation and whether that's an asset for homeowners in terms of trying to encourage people into the program.
Thank you. Rebecca, can I ask a quick question? On the list of modifications to our existing program on page 2, I highlighted the new application packet and the robust and the potential new monitoring process. That seems to be where most of the work would need to be, in the sense that in order to qualify the program, a homeowner would need to designate, schedule, budget, plan the type of work that they're proposing, lay it out, be part of the contract, and then the city would need to monitor that going forward. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, and it would be an ongoing
Yeah.
process.
So that's the significance that you're mentioning with Larkspur. People wouldn't necessarily want to try to lay out what the work would be to justify the tax break benefits, and the city tracking and monitoring it going forward is the potential administrative cost and schedule that we'd put together for the benefit of, in our case, 12 or very few residents.
Yes, and I actually talked to the planning director there, and she said since they made their modifications, they haven't received any applicants.
And
Thank you.
Can I add there? Because I think the other point is that work that's eligible for Mills Act is pretty restrictive. It's for the most part only the exterior of the property, and it has to be specifically the historical components, and so it's very restrictive for homeowners.
Yeah, I think, in fairness, Mayor Mark, I think, the other burden that if we were to ramp up the Mills Act program goes beyond the 2 bullet points you mentioned. It's the eligibility that Councilmember Wilkinson mentioned, and also the second bullet point, which is putting aside whether the property itself is eligible, what is the qualifying rehabilitation, restoration, and maintenance work? So it's sort of 2 different things, and there's equity that runs across all of that, right? It's a bunch of subjective judgments around whether a property is eligible, and then secondly, what what is the work that would be qualifying work to be done, and those are all judgments that have to be made sort of at every tier, I think. So it's I think you're right to focus on the first 2 you mentioned, but I would add the other 2 at the top as well.
And is it true, according to this, that this is something that every 5 years? So during one 5-year period, you have to come up with your plans, how you'd spend the money. That component is over, and then is it, if you have a 10-year, is it a second 5-year process? Is that process repeated?
I think the rehabilitation and maintenance program would be anytime you wanted to do something to your property. It's not dependent on the 5 or 10 year.
Okay.
It would be a constant review.
I think the way that it
by
works,
staff.
though, Jane, is when you, in most cities, when you submit for a Mills Act application, you have to, at the same time, submit your plan at the same time, and the amount you spend has to at least exceed the tax savings over the first 10 years of the program. And then most cities say you have to also complete that work within a certain time frame. It might be 3 years, it might be 5 years. And so, but the idea is that the tax breaks are just meant to help offset much, potentially much more significant qualifying restoration work.
Okay, thank you.
And if we were to discontinue the program or even modify it and there was very little utilization, the existing properties on the Mills Act program right now, if they were untouched, they would run for 15 years from their inception, correct?
I think if we were to discontinue the program, we would send a letter of non-renewal to all of the existing properties under the Mills Act, and the letter of non-renewal would run the length of 10 years, not 15.
If someone just signed up yesterday, for example, but they would get shorted 4 years arguably of tax benefits.
Yeah.
And do we know? Yeah, so there's 5 of those that would not have received the full 15-year term of their benefits. Have the previous Mills Act people typically gone 15 years?
Yes.
But my understanding is that none of these properties have done any qualifying work.
Yeah.
And I did drive around the last couple of days looking at several of them, and I would have to agree with Councilmember Wilkinson. I was surprised at some of the exteriors of the homes, so.
Well, I think 428 Golden Gate probably has done qualifying work.
I didn't say all of them, I said some.
Okay, so Councilman Wilkinson made her point clear about making the findings and, or not making the findings, making the recommendation to city staff to discontinue the program. Do we have any other thoughts to confirm that decision or to counter it perhaps?
I would agree with that decision. I think that we tried and realized that for the size of our city, that it's a huge burden, and the staff's really done a great job explaining all the pros and cons and what it would mean going forward. And again, because of the small numbers we have here, and I think because of the great work the Historic Society's committee has done, we have 30 wonderful homes already on our list. And as we've discussed, it doesn't mean it's the end of the Belvedere Historic Program, designation program at all. And so I agree that should we go forward, we would have to amend everything. And I would highly doubt that homeowners would agree. So I think it's better just to save you all time, and I would support ending it now.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with the comments from my colleagues. I also want to thank Mr. Campbell, Mr. Knaus, and Mr. Allen for the comments, and particularly Andy for your letter that we got. And those comments and the comments this evening really draw the distinction between how important it is, how critical it is that we continue to designate homes as historic, and the distinction between that and whether we run a Mills Act program. And I think what we're coming to is the realization that it's a very much an open question whether the existence of the Mills Act encourages homeowners to apply for historic designation. Very much an open question, I think, and also an open question whether the city gets a fair trade for the tax break that it gives, and the tax break that burdens a bunch of other municipalities in the state, right? It's 80% of the tax break is burdens entities, burdens the state. And I think it's not at all clear that the city is getting a fair trade for that break, that tax break. So I would support the comments of my colleagues that we would at this point suspend the program and send a 10-year termination.
Yeah, please.
I wanted to add just one comment, which is, I think, obvious, but just I see that there's a couple of applications that have already been submitted and are pending. I assume any deposit that they have given will be returned back to those homeowners.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. I likewise agree that I would recommend directing staff to return with an ordinance discontinuing the Mills Act program. I would ask, and I guess, subject to further review, you know, I took to heart your comment about we entered into these agreements, you know, albeit perhaps without the full knowledge or understanding of our responsibilities, but in good faith to represent the full term of those contracts. So I would look at the ones that are affected by this to see if what the financial benefit and cost would be. I do take it very seriously, and I do agree with Councilmember Lynch where he talks about the benefit to only 12 property owners in Belvedere for the financial cost to the state and the financial cost to Belvedere, and the potential additional cost of our time to do so far outweighs, I think, the benefit for the very few who do benefit for this. So I can likewise make those recommendations to city staff to come back to us with a ordinance to discontinue this program. I don't think you need a vote. I think you've heard the discussion, correct? Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 6B, before we go back to Beach Road once again, discussion and possible action on a revocable license for 218 Bayview Avenue.
Thank you again, Mayor Mark and council members. For your consideration this evening is an application for revocable license for the property at 218 Bayview Avenue. In April 2017, the Planning Commission approved applications for a new single-family home at 218 Bayview Avenue. In June of 2017, City Council approved a revocable license for private improvements in the Bayview Avenue right-of-way. In April 2020, the 2017 Planning Commission approval had expired. And in July 2020, the Planning Commission approved the project a second time. When the applicant submitted for a building permit, the Public Works engineer required a second revocable license for proposed drainage improvements within the Beach Road public right-of-way. The proposed improvements in the Beach Road right-of-way are shown shaded in the exhibit on the right and represented by the red lines in the image on the left. The project proposes two new improvements, including a 4-inch in diameter sewer lateral and a new 6-inch in diameter storm drain that would connect to an existing stormwater dissipator. The existing stormwater dissipator along Beach Road is shown here, circled in red. Staff suggests the improvements benefit the public as the project will preserve and protect water and sewage infrastructure and services in the immediate area, and that the findings for the revocable license can be made and recommends approval. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sammy. Just a quick question. Could you confirm, it's my understanding that unlike a planning commission entitlement, which can expire, it can expire if the project hasn't gone to the building department for permit and begun construction, a revocable license approved by the city council does not expire whether it's built or not.
That's correct.
Okay. So the existing revocable license for the uphill side is in existence. It's in good standing, and we're asked now for an additional revocable license for the Beach Road side of their property.
That's exactly right.
Okay, thank you. Any other further questions for city staff?
The only one that I think was just clarified is that on page 2 of the revocable license, number 14, is a little bit confusing the way it's written, given what we now know to be true. And it says any previous revocable license issued to this property are now null and void. So that sort of implies that the June 17th one that you mentioned, I mean, you could read it, that it would be. So I think maybe in the future, if there's anything like that where there's two revocable licenses, to make it specific to the area or the, however you would designate it, because I assumed that it meant the other one was null and void. And Peter just
Yeah.
clarified, Mayor Mark just
Your,
clarified.
your second paragraph makes it clear on the first page of that license, but Jane's absolutely right. That's got to be reconciled a little better on that second page.
That's my only question.
Any further questions for Sammy or staff? No? Thank you. Thank you for the staff report. Open the public comment for this item. Seeing no comments here, actually no attendees here. I know. Anyone online?
There are no hands raised.
Thank you. I'll return it for deliberation or a motion if there are none. Would anybody have any comments?
I can make the motion.
Please.
I move to approve the revocable license for private improvements in the public right of way along Beach Road for the property at 218 Bayview Avenue, with the caveat that we would revise condition 14 to make it consistent with the language of the license. That was a good catch by Mayor Mark and Councilmember Cooper.
I'll second that.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you for that presentation, Sammy. Moving back now to item 5A, whether the applicant is here or not. Brian, the mic is yours. Thank you.
Hey, great to see you guys again. All right. Good evening, Mayor Mark, fellow council members. Before you tonight is a CTL penalty appeal for the recent project at 22 Beach Road. The project was 12 days past the CTL deadline and was assessed a penalty of $7,200. This project consisted of two building permits. The first was issued on October 28th, 2021 to replace the roof, windows and doors, and railings on the structure. Per the valuation provided on the building permit application, the project was assessed an 18-month CTL timeline. During this construction, it was discovered by the contractor that the existing supports and the substructure of that structure were insufficient and in need of repair and/or replacement. The building permit for this work was issued on July 12th, 2022. The CTL deadline for this permit was the same as the initially issued permit in October of 2021. Due to the valuation of the original permit that got 18 months, the added value of the secondary permit had no effect on that timeline. The project was then provided a 6-month CTL extension for a total of 24 months due to this additional structural repairs required. This created a new CTL deadline of October 28th, 2023. The project was not finalized by that time, so the building department sent out the 30-day CTL grace period letter, setting a finalization date of November 30th, 2023. The additional days are because their initial CTL date was on a Friday, and per the code, if your date ends on a Friday, it skips over to the next business day, which would have been that Monday. Prior to sending out the grace letter, on September 20th, 2023, the planning department went out to the site to conduct a pre-final inspection. It was at this inspection that the planning department discovered the installation of new exterior lighting. This lighting was not reviewed nor approved. At this time, the planning department notified the contractor that the newly installed lighting would require a retroactive design review approval. On October 2nd, 2023, the contractor applied for a design review exception for the lighting. That is the middle tier of design review here at the city. The planning department worked with the contractor to process this exception, or DRE, and the lighting was approved on November 29th, 2023. It was during this time that the building department finalized both building permits. The finalization occurred on November 13th, 2023. Following the DRE approval on November 29th, there is a 10-day appeal period that must be held for any project opposition to voice their concerns. Following this appeal period, the planning department conducted and approved the final planning inspection. With a finalization date of December 11th, 2023, the project was 12 days past the CTL deadline and subsequently fined $7,200. The contractor timely appealed the penalty based on two items. The first was that the project was delayed due to the additional structural upgrades that were required. Next, the contractor argued that the required planning department approval at the end of the project delayed the final approvals and inspections and therefore sent the project into the penalty phase. Staff contends that the time lost for additional structural work was addressed with the original 6-month CTL extension that was provided. Staff also agrees that the time taken to submit, review, and approve the lighting is not a justifiable reason for the project delay. The project was underway for well over a year before this issue had arisen. Staff feels that there was ample time to submit, review, and approve the lighting plans should they have been submitted in a timely manner. I would also like to stress that this is a contractor we often see numerous times throughout the year on numerous different projects and permits. So they have a well-known idea of how the City of Belvedere process works, not only the building department, the public works department, and the planning department. Lastly, they also had other elements of this project that required planning approval and submitted those in a timely manner. Staff recommends that City Council deny the appeal and uphold the $7,200 fine. Staff is now open for questions.
Thank you, Brian. Do we have questions for our Director of Building Services?
Just curious, what's the total value on the project?
The total value on the project, both combined, off the top of my head, I believe was $1,850,000.
I just want to make sure I understood this. All work actually did get finished in time. Is that correct?
They
Except
did
for the
have to
lighting?
modify, as stated in the staff report, because of the additional structural upgrades that were required. They had to modify the original permit and decrease
Right.
the scope of work to stay within the FEMA regulations.
Okay, but what I mean is, it sounds as though the vast majority of the work was actually accomplished in the amount of time they were given.
Correct.
Aside from the lighting. And
Correct.
that the lighting wound up being a retroactive
Yes, ma'am.
permit, because they went ahead and put it in and then.
Well, we modified the original permits to include the lighting, but it also requires an additional planning approval, one of the design review approval. So that was the time taken. It was just a revision mostly in the building permit plans for the addition of the lights, because basically it's just running a wire to these new areas. So we can have that modified as part of the building permit. However, what they propose in installing are exterior lights and a Belvedere by code that has to go through the planning department for approval.
So those lights that are subject to that we're talking about, they were not part of the original planning approval, nor the second structural approval, which had some modifications to the base scope.
Correct.
I'm just curious, given how seasoned this contractor is, like, why?
I could not speak for the contractor.
Okay.
Can I ask, Mr. Van Son, the letter that the appellant submitted, attachment 6, says that all work was completed by November 27, and that Sammy went out that day and inspected the work. Is that correct?
Just one second. Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, and so, and the fines under the timeline and the 30-day grace period, the fines commenced on November 30.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and so no work occurred after November 27?
As I understand, yes, that is correct.
Okay. the design, the DRE, the design review exception. The staff report says it was filed on October 2, or the request was filed on
Yes, sir.
October 2. The attachment 6, the letter from Hadley, says it was filed on September 26.
That's incorrect. We received the DRE application on October 2nd. However, we did not receive payment until October 13th, and we will not start the process of review on a project until we receive the payment.
Okay, and the DRE was approved on 11/29, November 29,
Correct,
and that was 2 days after the work was completed.
correct.
All right, and so Ms. Markwick, thank you for that comment that the fee didn't come in until October 13. But it's 45 days to make a decision on a DRE. And how does that compare with a typical timeline?
That is typical. I know there's at least 20 days of noticing. We get an application in, we have to review it. Then we would send out a pre-notice. Then at the end, there's a 10-day appeal period. So you can subtract those 20 days just for noticing. There were some revisions to the plans that the applicant needed to make. And so there's a couple days there that we waited for those revisions. So to me, 45 days is a more than standard process for a DRE.
Thank you. And I know that the practice is that the CTL doesn't stop until planning signs off, right?
That is correct.
And that happened on December 11.
Yes.
Okay. But we all agree that Sammy went out and inspected it on November 27.
Sammy,
Yeah.
Sammy, or the planning department initially, I believe it was Sammy on September 20th for the pre-inspection, and that's how the lighting was first discovered.
September 20th, but I asked you earlier if Hadley was correct when they said that the work was completed on November 27 and that Sammy inspected it that day, and I think you said yes.
He did go out to confirm that there was no longer any work. Sorry,
Okay.
I got confused there.
Got it. Thank you.
So if the DRE wasn't, the scope of work for under the exception was inspected on the 27th and confirmed to be compliant with the plans, the iterative changes that took place back and forth over that period of time. And then the DRE was officially approved on the 29th. The planning approval was on the 11th. That constitutes the entire coverage of the CTL fine, December 1st being the end of that grace period. How come the planning department didn't, were they not asked to come out, or why wouldn't the 27th following up the pre-approval, sorry, the pre-inspection be the planning final? I mean, I didn't say that well, but it seems that what we're getting at is that there was no work. They met all the conditions of the planning entitlement, arguably as of the 27th. The fact that planning didn't go out and do their full walk around on the December 11th constitutes the entire scope of the CTL fine.
Yes, sir, it does. So according to the code, the planning signature final inspection, approval of that final inspection is the inspection that ends the CTL. Because they waited so long to get this approval at the very end of the project, that 10-day appeal period ended up constituting their entire fine. However, we do not have the authority as the CTL appeals committee, nor as a building official or planning director to waive any of those penalties. We assess the penalties. The applicant or the property owner has the right to appeal those penalties and come to city council for that decision. And so that is where we at right now.
Thank you.
I just have a little clarification question then. So everything was pretty much going along until it was discovered that the lighting had not been permitted appropriately. And that's what wound up taking the time. Had all the lighting been submitted in the normal way that one would for all these permits, there would not be a CTL, but or presumably. But because the lighting was, I don't know what else to say except mishandled by the contractor, and then the planning department discovered it, then that is what's triggered this CTL, because then you had to do as if you were starting a design review
Yeah, so we,
section all over again,
yes,
even though it came late.
we did
And
have to go through the
you had to
process.
go through the same process, no matter where it came in the timeline. It was
Correct.
only because it was post, it all came out at the end rather than during the normal time.
Correct. If it would have been submitted, you know, at 4 months in advance, prior to when it was, the 45 days would have come and gone, been
Right.
approved. Everyone would have finished their work. We'd have signed off, planning would have signed off, and we'd all gone to the next job.
And it is curious, given how much work this particular contractor does. Okay.
I would
Thanks.
just like to point out too, that we, during our construction time limit meetings, we are very clear to all applicants that any change needs to come to the planning department. So we really do our sort of due diligence and over explaining our process, because it is somewhat, you know, cumbersome and complicated, but we do, Brian does a great job explaining everything to all applicants.
If there's no more questions for staff, like to open the public hearing and ask the appellant team if they would like to make a presentation. Still no appellant team? Okay, thank you. Continue the the public hearing. If there was any members of the public in the city council chambers, there are none here. So online, I see Bill Rothman. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, yes, hello.
Go ahead. Thank you.
This hearing was a real education for me and perhaps for others. I had always seen it as sort of contentious, that the planning department says you're over time, and the person says, well, no, I'm not, or there's this excuse or whatever. And I don't know the gentleman's name, but he really clarified things for me in saying that we simply carry out the law, and it happens to be written in a certain way. So we simply do what we're told to do by the law that we're directed to follow. And then it comes to the council, and the council decides what to do. Well, that's a very much more friendly sort of interaction than I had felt it was in the past. So in essence, I think what the gentleman was saying was that, yes, the work was done, but there are these technical things that came up, but all we did was carry out what the law says. So now, council, you should decide what is justified. And I think that feels much more friendly than the sense that I had gotten in the past in some other instances. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
There are no other hands raised.
Okay, I will bring it back to the council for deliberations or comments about the appeal. Any thoughts? Jim, please.
I'll go first and just say out loud that I am confused, and not confused, but I'm uncertain about how to proceed. I think this is a tough call. And I empathize with our staff, who does a phenomenal job in all respects, and quite properly applies the CTL, which is a very important law and rule, and a big part of the sort of enforcement scheme that we have. And very clearly, whatever happened with the lighting, the contractor contends it was required by state law. Whatever it was, very clearly it should have been raised earlier. And very clearly they built something that wasn't drawn, and that is problem number one. And I think that lands with the contractor here, or the appellant, We're right to bring it, I think, to council for this review. Having said all that, this is a seasoned contractor. They're a big player in town. They are, very capable and I think very responsible. And at the end of the day, the problem got raised late, but the building and the hammering and the nail pounding stopped on the 27th of November, which was 3 days before the fines began being assessed. And I could get comfortable with granting this appeal and absolving the appellant of the $7,200 penalty, principally because this was a big kind of gnarly project, went on for a while. They de-scoped it near the end when they were running out of time. And at the end of the day, this lighting thing did get resolved and the nail pounding stopped before the fines would be assessed. So I could get comfortable granting the appeal. Maybe I'm getting soft in my old age.
Thank you. Councilmember Wilkinson?
I hate these appeals because it is always, everything's always a little gray. And the thing that's in the back of my mind is just equal treatment. And I'm just thinking back through my mind in terms of other similar appeals that we might have had, where the work has stopped, but there's various administrative reasons or other reasons why we have chosen to enforce the CTL fine. And so the way I unfortunately read this one is that they had ample time to submit the requisite paperwork and didn't. So I would deny the appeal, would be my opinion.
And I would agree with Councilmember Wilkinson. I think it may sound as if it's just lighting, but I think lighting is a component of landscaping and all kinds of other issues that don't require hammers and nails. And yet they are all part of the design review and they are all considered equally important. And therefore, I think we have to treat them that way as long as they are. So I would agree to deny the appeal.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a lot of experience on a few asides of this issue, and both from the planning side, working with Brian and Rebecca on the building side, actually. And I think what I see as the biggest point here isn't so much when the work stopped, when the hammers and nails and the noise stopped, so much as the process that is very clearly delineated at every stage of the way by the building official, by the planning department prior to issuance of a building permit, by the planning commission sitting here approving plans, that it's important to this community to follow not only the timeline that's been put forward, but the process that if your plans change, come back to the city, that we greatly encourage permission as opposed to approval after the fact. And I think this applicant built something they weren't entitled to build. Fortunately, it was small enough to be resolved quickly and efficiently. But I think that is a powerful reminder that I think we really don't want to encourage people to ask forgiveness, but want them to go through the process as straightforward as possible. I can see myself modifying the fee, but I do support denying the appeal and supporting the process that has been well-worn and very effective for our city. So can I have a motion, perhaps?
Would you, Mayor Mark, you said you might support modifying.
Yes, I would.
Building.
I mean, I would knock it in half. That was part of my thinking coming in from the perspective that the work was done. Had this been done earlier, it's important to note that it wouldn't be an issue, but I do think that I can also not, and I'm comfortable not as well. So,
And my memory is terrible, so I'm just trying to think back to the ones that we've seen over the last couple of years and how this might relate to them. And maybe my memory isn't as clear as others, but my sense is that we have enforced these full fines in other circumstances. Maybe staff is clearer on that?
We have had other projects in the not too distant past where we did have people forget about administrative issues, things like that. I think this one is a little different whereas where they had forgotten about administrative requirements or things like that for months along the time and we gave them credit for those months. This was time taken to get approvals for work that was never approved. So there's a little bit of a difference in comparison to other jobs that where we gave credit for no work being done because of I didn't dot this I on my application or I didn't get this approval from this outside agency, which causes no impact on the neighborhood. This one we see as a little different, where it does have an impact with lighting and the work was done without permits originally, and to get it with city staff working to get it legalized, it just took you past that timeline. And that's the reason why there was fines, is because the work that you did and that was discovered that you didn't notify us about, that we went out and found, that took extra time to get approved, and that's where the penalty comes in. It's not the absent-mindedness of I forgot to turn in this form.
yeah, it's my understanding that I don't know that there's been many where there's been no work beyond the CTL period of time. There's been some debate about when that CTL period would have ended, but to a great degree, the work had always surpassed that CTL timing. There's been some applicants who has claimed that CTL should have been further extended well beyond that, but our determination is debatable in those situations. There's no debate when the CTL should have ended and all work was done prior to that. That's the only distinction that I think Councilmember Lynch is making, which I do think is I don't know that we've had that experience before.
Not in my time here. I don't recall.
But I do take Brian's point that they put something in that they hadn't applied for, and that's bad behavior. They knew it. I'm sure it wasn't, these are seasoned again. It's not by mistake. And that's why I'm just a bit confused by that.
Well, if it makes a difference, I will say that my persuasive colleagues have persuaded me of the correctness of their position and supported by the most recent comments by Mr. Van Saun. So I would uphold, I would be willing to support upholding,
Denying the appeal.
denying the appeal. Thank you.
Can we have a motion to,
Excuse me, Mayor.
sure, I didn't open the public comment. Sorry.
No, I think you did take you did take public comment, but I actually would like just to make one other
Sure.
friendly suggestion or friendly amendment. So if the council is inclined to deny the appeal, I believe that's correct. If I could also suggest that you direct staff to add a whereas clause that details our attempts to notify the appellant of our attempts to reach him prior to today's hearing and also at the hearing itself, just for the record.
Okay, thank you. Could we entertain a motion to deny the appeal and affirm the construction time limit penalty, noting the suggestion by our city attorney to identify our notice of the applicant to make their comments tonight?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you for that. Moving now to item 7, which is our open forum. I don't see any hands raised for the open forum here. Madam Clerk, are there anyone online to speak during open forum?
Mayor Mark, I see no hands raised.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for attending. I now adjourn our meeting for this evening. Good night.